Hi, um, I'm Doak. This is obviously episode 8. The opening slide said 7. That's a mistake. It's booze with a Z, not booze with an booze with an S. Which, if you're of a certain age, you know that's a pun on the title of a very, very, very terrible song that Liza Minnelli sang, that Candor and Ebb wrote for her for a special that she did on TV. Got an Emmy for that. I think she got other awards and other disciplines for it. I want to talk about booze. It's a really intensely personal topic for me. I don't think I've ever heard sort of a public bunch of local theater people talk about alcohol and its presence in community theater, good and bad. And I just thought we'd have a chance to do that tonight. So I invited 5 of my smart friends to come talk with me about it. And I'd like them all to show up now on the screen. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
Everyone's unmuted, and we're going to start by, I'll just introduce you one at a time and give you a chance to say a few words about what you're thinking about this topic, just as we roll into it. And we're going to start with Gini, who I've been married to 5 times on stage, and it never goes well.
Yeah, it never has once, has it?
No.
No, and even when we were brother-sister.
I know. I know.
Together. No.
You were married?
No.
And
No.
even when I had a barnyard friend for a lover.
Right, yeah.
Anyway.
It was I found it curious that you asked me to do this. But I was interested in it. I was brought up in a Mormon household, and wonderful parents who in their world, and they wanted to introduce us to everything that was beautiful in the world. We went to museums, we went to plays, we always had music in the house. We all played piano. My father played cello. We went to church together, but we went to national parks. And as I grew, I guess the desire to know the beautiful things in the world, the wonderful things in the world, by extension then became, I always wanted to know about what good food. And then, of course, along with that, good wine that goes with good food. I was always very curious and interested in those, in the best, I mean, that sounds funny, but I just wanted to taste the best of things. I want to see the best of things. I want to taste the best. And I was fortunate enough to have some friends that were in the wine industry and introduced me to some very delicious and lovely bottles. And I think part of the beauty of it was that we drank those bottles in Italy, and we drank them in France. And one of the things that then becomes such a joy for me is that I have my friends around the table and we drink a bottle of wine, and that feeling of fellowship and, in vino veritas, when people become, I won't say their true selves, but a relaxed version of themselves. There's a beauty to that. Now, this topic, I've never had a connection between being on stage and having a drink. I mean, we would go out and drink afterwards sometimes. But for me, that was never something I needed or never something I thought of. It's a different part. It's something that's just separate for me. Yes, I'm a social drinker. And I like it because of the history that goes into it, the taste, the feeling that you get. And yeah, it's an integral part of those feelings for me.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you, Ginny. I'm gonna just say a couple things. And Veronica, I'm gonna introduce you next. But the two phrases you said, "true selves" and "relaxed version of themselves," it just nails it right for me. It's like, in my own drinking career, which spanned up until actually a year and a half ago, or from age 30 to then. So much of my thinking about drinking was about those two things, and still not clear on true or more relaxed. But Veronica, who I've been married to once on stage, didn't have a lot of stage time, but it was what do you think, sweetheart?
So many of the things that Gini mentions, having those connections and memories with, are the very things that terrified me when I took my jump from a heavily drinking person to a non-drinking person overnight. In August of 2017, I made some very troubling decisions related to self-harm. And it was after consuming way too much alcohol, after several months of some just really challenging times. One of them being the death of our dear friend, Mark Mandenberg, in June of 2017. That was a very catalytic event for me, that just sort of got jumbled up in a big, a denouement of my drinking, I suppose. And I woke up the next morning after this particular incident, a couple months after Mark's death, and I decided that I never wanted to feel the way that I did again. And I haven't had a drink since. And that is a very personal victory, a very genetic victory, I'm coming to understand. And it's mine, it's nobody else's. And one of the things that I would want to communicate as someone who is a non-drinker, I find myself qualifying this sometimes with being a non-religious person as well, is I don't besmirch anyone else, their decisions and their experiences and the way that they choose to walk their own paths. And so just because I have made the very, very distinct decision that alcohol cannot be a part of my life because I am not a responsible person, nor am I a person that I want my children to be around as a drinker, doesn't mean that I know full well the fellowship that happens over a bottle of wine. As Gini is mentioning those experiences, I reminisce about those and wish that I could be a responsible drinker. And I worry about, or I wonder, maybe with a little bit of worry, where did that Veronica go? Because as many, at least two folks on the panel today has seen the Veronica that comes out when booze comes out. And so I wonder where she went. I wonder if it's okay that she's a different person now. And I think that she is, but it's always just very interesting to reflect on some of those very, very wild times, primarily with my theater family. And so grateful for always having a soft, sometimes not literally landing. So I'm thrilled to be having this conversation. I think like everything in life, and I've had my share of interesting chapters. I think with everything, it's important to talk about it and be honest and transparent and be open to others' experiences. So thank you for having me.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much, Veronica. Yeah. Amy, we're going to go to you next.
Oh, okay, sure.
Amy has directed me many, many times on stage, and it's always been a delight. Here's a director I love so much because you're so transparent about your own discoveries when you're figuring a play out, and we get to watch you do it. It's really fun. So go ahead.
I am a little like Gini. I was really honored that you asked me to be a part of the conversation. And booze being a topic is also interesting to me. I worked in bars probably from the time I was 18 till Well, 29, because I was a general manager of a restaurant. So I was always around a bar culture, bars, mixing drinks, having that very social conversation, getting done 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. But I wasn't a heavy drinker. I mean, I would party, right? I mean, no, I'm going to be 58 years old, so we used to party. That's a term from my era. And once I got out of that field, I mean, having alcohol all over your hands, coming home smelling like, at that point you could smoke in bars. I was never a smoker. It was always on me, on my clothes, at my hands. So I would never drink a ton, but I loved beer. I loved a cold beer. Oh, to this day, I absolutely love a cold beer. It is brings me great joy. And once I was married and divorced, that's when I got into theater. So I was a single parent of 2 small children trying to make it work. I didn't have a lot of money, so drinking wasn't really in my budget. And I fell into a very disciplined group. The Actor Spotlight Workshop with Len Klug, who was a recovering alcoholic, was a disciplined theater group. We were there to learn the craft of acting. And drinking before a show was a surefire way of getting fired and tossed out of that group. And there wouldn't have been a second chance. It would have been no tolerance for that, because you were in it to learn, you were a student, you were open to that. And through that process of somewhat the method, right? I became so self-aware, it put me into therapy. I went to therapy for the first time in my life to try to figure out what it was I wanted, how to not repeat mistakes, and it's mostly relationship stuff. But I didn't get in, alcohol was never part of that. And it's never been part of it for me for acting. That's like Gini, a very separate part of what I do that I love, that I cherish, that I value, that I wouldn't put it at risk for anything. I wouldn't put anybody, if I were directing a show, I wouldn't put them at risk. I wouldn't put the show at risk, etc. I am unbelievably responsible, and that's just me. I'm responsible. My kids will tell you I'm responsible for everything. And I tell them that I'm responsible for you. I'm responsible for this. I'm responsible. And I would feel it wouldn't, I couldn't do it. I just couldn't. And that's no judgment for anybody else. That's just me and how I have to cope with everything else, right? But I love the fellowship of a great meal and a great bottle of wine. Although I can't drink wine that much, there's a lot of sugar in wine, and I just can't. It doesn't sit with me very well. But I'll have a beer on occasion. And as I have gotten older, my ability and my metabolism has changed so much that now I rarely drink, because there's honestly too many calories, and I have just as much, I have a good enough time now without it. But when I do have it, it's one and I'm like, woo, that's cool. Wow. And I've seen people who do drink before a show. That's happened to me before, where I've been in a cast and I've kind of thought maybe, and then I think, that's hard for me, because when you're on stage, you have to trust everybody. And if I know that ahead of time, that's hard for me. So, and I'm kind of mouthy about it. I'll usually say something, just because I don't want it to impact everything else. You put so much hard work into everything you do, and you just need everybody to be safe.
Okay, good. Thank you, Amy. Shannon, you're the one that I always keep wanting to be on stage with, and we never managed to make it work
I
out.
know.
And last time was not because of drinking, but because I had stopped drinking for 10 weeks and I had this encephalopathy. Ginny and Joe were both also in that show, Dancing at Luna's. I had to leave a week before it opened because I couldn't even figure out what scene I was in. My brain was so mushy from the, what is it, the ammonia that was in excess in my body. Gerard always said, just do the windows and take care of that. So Shannon, give us your take, please.
Sure. Thank you for having me too. So this is an interesting topic for me because alcohol has been a part of my life since day one. So I can mark my life by before it was gone. So its presence, and then when it was, so when it was there and when it was gone. I am the child of a very proud member of AA. It's 35 plus years that my dad has been sober. He worked very hard for that. I was, young enough to see things, but young enough to be masked from things too. And my father's a very proud person. And it was a great honor of my life to be invited to his 20-year meeting in which he got his chip. There were revelations that were brought forth at that time that I didn't know about him. And it was very humbling. He's a very proud man. And I don't get a lot of backstory. So it was an honor to be a part of that. Growing up with someone who was sober and who had to make conscious decisions about staying away from alcohol because of the sort of pitfalls that it presented, it was a very black and white, good or bad. So I grew up believing that alcohol was bad and that you shouldn't drink because it could lead to. And there was always conversation around genetic disposition and this is part of your makeup. And if you go down this road, you could end up like, and, fill in the blank. So I didn't grow up in the same way that, sometimes kids do, where you go to parties and I personally grew up scared of, I don't want to fall down that path. I don't want to, if I take one drink, I won't be able to stop. So I didn't really drink until, later than most peers. And I certainly carried a lot of sort of personal judgment when I would see individuals imbibing. I very much would be like, wow, that's, you're going to go down the bad path, because that's just the way I grew up. And it wasn't necessarily the my parents weren't necessarily instilling that, but it was like, there was always the talk of, I chose this because I didn't want the alternative. So I would just perceive that as, well, clearly anybody who's drinking is doing the alternative. So it took me a really long time. And there's a lot of guilt still in, being 40 plus years old, that when I imbibe, every drink think, is this going to be the drink that tips me over the edge? Like, and so that runs through my head, no matter what, still does. I struggle with the idea of the social drinking. So, I come home from a busy work week, whatever, and I want to enjoy a beer. I love craft beer. That's one of my favorite things. I love being in mid-Michigan and being able to explore all these different breweries when we can safely. But I love having a beer, and every time I feel guilty because I want to have it in the back of my mind. And so I have to reconcile in, my own sort of mind about that. When it comes to the theater, I very much have a reverence around, you don't drink before you do a show. And that child in me still has that sense of judgment in the back of my head when I do know that someone has before a show. Like, that's your preparation. We all worked really hard to get here, or the same can be said for when I see someone who's portraying inebriated on stage. I, you know, there's part of me that sort of takes that with a really heavy hand, in that, you know, sometimes it comes off as very caricature, or, you know, it's just, it feels disingenuous. And it, to me, I'm like, that's disrespectful, you know? So I have a lot of like sort of almost Catholic feeling about drinking, but you know, I too, as an adult, like it's interesting to think of my children. I simultaneously feel guilty sometimes having a beer in front of them, because I didn't grow up that way. I didn't grow up seeing that. Like, it was weird to hear friends say, "Oh yeah, my parents had a party," and I'd be like, "Oh my God, were the cops called?" Like, I just I couldn't reconcile it. So it's an interesting thing to sort of balance in my head.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Thank you. Thank you, Shannon. Glad you're here. Joe, I guess what I want to say about you is you've become like a kind of conscience in my head. I don't know if you know this, but I was like, your thought process, and I think maybe it's because you're an aeronaut now. I mean, because you're all flying your plane all the time, and you get this 5,000, 10,000, I don't know how you go up at the view of the world. And I always have just great respect for stuff you say. So thank you for being here. And you're also an owner of a theater, or not an owner, but a manager of a theater, and have been on all sides of this. So what does your heart and head say about this?
Well, I thank you for that, Doak, and thanks for inviting me. I'm sad to say that we've never been married on stage either.
That would be fun.
Would be.
You know, in company. I'm sorry. Always have to bring up company. You're the only one in this cast that was in that. But there was they had that pre-show stuff where we all were just wandering around on stage while the audience was coming in.
Veronica was in there.
I was in that show.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Veronica.
Super memorable.
You were married to each other.
I was married to Joe. I
Yep.
was married to Joe.
Right. Well,
Yep.
Veronica,
She
you
knows.
probably remember this, though. There was this, among that babble that we had with each other on stage while the audience was coming in, was this
Yes.
thing of, there were all three Joes were in that show, right? Joe
Joe
Dickson,
Fecta.
Joe Bauman, and Joe Quick. And the big question was, which of the Joes do we think was the best kisser?
I have
And
no
everybody said Joe Dickson. I think that was a good sentence. Sorry.
Yeah, but they were just trying to get under the other two Joe's skin. So
Too many distractions. I'm sorry.
that's
And
all right.
I'm really sorry. I forgot you were in the show, Veronica.
It's fine. I'll remember it always. It's cool.
I know you will. Joe.
I mean, this is a really interesting topic. It's hard to think about something that generates more strong feelings and conflicting feelings within yourself than alcohol, right?
Mhm.
We've kind of all talked so far. We've kind of all talked about our start with alcohol and what our background was. So I guess I'll start there. My parents were pretty blue collar drinkers. I would call them healthy drinkers, I guess. I mean, I never had any concept of what alcoholism was until I was in my mid-20s, really. I'd never had any experience with that. So, I mean, they drank cheap beer and cheap wine coolers, but otherwise, they had a couple of beers every once in a while and they were good. So that's what I grew up around. And, I had a sip of beer every now and again as a kid, right, as you do. And that was my experience until my mom passed away when I was 17. And part of that whole process was coming together with my father. My father's never been a particularly emotional man, and we needed to come together. So we found a way to do that, and that way was to play pool. So we started going out to bars and stuff to play pool together. And of course, he'd have a beer or whatever, and I wouldn't, obviously. I'm 17 at the time. But I fell in love with the game of pool. And so between the ages of 17 and really until I found theater, so 24, 25, I played pool a lot. So I spent a lot of time in bars before I could drink. And I spent a lot of time gambling money with people who were drinking when I wasn't drinking. And so that was my baseline for watching people and their experience with alcohol. So I feel like I have a healthy relationship with alcohol, other than, I scared myself once as a kid getting behind the wheel of a car when I shouldn't have. But other than that, I feel like I have a relatively healthy relationship with alcohol. But I go through some of the same self-doubts that I've heard, like Shannon mention, is this okay? Am I okay? But I think partly from my experience seeing people play pool when they were drunk and winning money off of them, frankly, that's helped to generate how I feel about booze in theater, which is, again, it's a very delineated rule. It struck me that the quotes that you had up when we entered this segment, the rules that she had, it's fascinating. I think everyone on this screen has those rules. I mean, they're different, of course, they're different, but they're rules. I can't think of another substance or circumstance that's true, that everybody has rules. So for me, I would never go on stage having had a drink, and I don't ever participate in the pre-show drinks that do sometimes occur. But I really enjoy having a glass of wine with folks afterwards. I enjoy that camaraderie, and I enjoy that. I also have kind of a conflicted relationship with it as a theater operator. Over the Ledge exists in one of the more gray areas, in that you can drink there. You can bring in alcohol and drink there, and that's not typically the case. But it being in the middle of a park, there's a gray area in the laws that lets that occur. So it's interesting, both promoting that as a positive and also having experienced, I've experienced a couple of actors that have gone on stage in a production not sober, at least one of which to a very, very negative result. So it's an interesting conflict.
Yeah. Thanks. Sure. My family didn't drink at all growing up, and my father maybe once or twice had a beer or something, and every time he did it, he would get so sappy, and he would tell us those wonderful kids who were to give us all 50 cents. And it was like so weird. I mean, he wasn't like that when he wasn't drunk. He was kind of problematic as a father. But I never, so I didn't drink till I was in my 30s. And which is atypical of alcoholics, I think. But one thing I've learned from getting to know people who identify as alcoholic is that if you've met one alcoholic, you've met one alcoholic, as different as snowflakes, even though there are, I'm sure, medical and scientific things about the chemistry and all that. I wasn't drinking when I started doing theater. I started drinking and went through an emotional crisis that really was where alcohol stuck into me as being a thing to help get through that. I mean, to cope with the feelings of rejection and and basically to keep myself alive. I did actually plan my suicide. I actually planned it for the last night of a production of Our Town at LCC, which I played Mr. Webb. And I thought, I'm going to go home and drink as much vodka as I can, get in the car, turn it on, shut the garage. So it was my most successful sort of venture into that, trying to do that. And I failed. I don't know why, but I was out on the lawn, somewhere in there I got out and collapsed and didn't die. And I thought, oh, okay, well, I guess I'm not supposed to die yet. And from the moment I met vodka, it's been my friend. Okay, it's been my friend. And I counselors and other alcoholics get really upset with me for saying that. They say, oh, treacherous friend, backstabbing friend. No, I don't have a relationship with him anymore, but he is a friend, and he helped me stay alive, and I'm glad to be alive now. I'm loving being alive, especially since I got sober a year and a half ago. But the truth is, I never went on stage drunk, but I certainly prepared. And when I drank after work, for example, I had this idea that I found, as Ginny was saying, I found my true self, or I find a more relaxed self that I couldn't find otherwise. 20 minutes into it, that first vodka tonic. And I'd find thoughts and things and ideas I never had before. And I'd find parts of characters I was exploring on stage. And I thought that having a drink an hour and a half or so before a rehearsal or a performance helped me get to a place of, being more ready to be open and all that. And so I did that, and now since I've stopped drinking, it's like, I guess the quarantining has been great for me. I don't know why, but I'm in the most creative spurt of my life right now. It's like I got to pick which thing to work on any minute of the day. And I partly attribute that to my sobriety too. I wouldn't be there. I would be a slug on the couch probably if I were still drinking. So that's me. So where do we go with this? It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, all of our stories, I think, are just really contribute to an interesting mosaic. And it's there a lot, and it's helpful a lot, and it's hurtful a lot.
I was interested.
Veronica,
go ahead, Veronica.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. So I'm not sure if my audio was on when the Stritch quotes were rolling at the beginning, but her routine of one right before curtain, one at intermission, and depending how you're feeling in your guts at the 11 o'clock number, that's how I operated towards the end of. So I haven't done a show in almost 4 years at this point, but the latter chunk of my sporadic times on stage, it was a shot or two, a pull or two off of a Jameson bottle at the top of a show, depending if it was a musical or not. And I justified it with, let's get some loose vocal cords. Let's get outside of your own head. Let's find that part of you that is uninhibited, but not too uninhibited, Veronica, because that would be too much. And you really I learned at that time what was too much by some trial and error off stage. And I knew it was very formulaic. Here is the maximum amount that you can drink in order to feel what you need to feel to accomplish this particular thing on stage. And that's gross. I'm not proud of that, but it's absolutely part of my reality. And so when friggin' Elaine Stritch is like, yeah, I did that too, I'm like, oh, well, I'm just like Elaine Stritch. It's completely fine. No, it's not. It's not completely fine, especially in the context of my personal experience with alcohol. I can't venture to say whether or not that is successful for folks who have a very different relationship with alcohol, but that is that's a glimpse inside some of the decision making that one makes if they are going to drink ahead of or during a show. Those were some of my milestones that I would justify, and really I am interested as now a sober person, someone who doesn't drink. I have trouble with the words for it since I'm a word person, and I feel like there's nothing that really encapsulates what it is. I'm very curious as to what theater and performance and singing in front of other people and being part of a dialogue as another person, what that looks like as non-drinking Veronica, because I've never felt more me than I have in the past 3+ years. But there's a part of me that's terrified to expose and be as vulnerable as one can feel on stage without that very particular crutch. So, yeah.
It's interesting. I've done one show since I was sober, and I do think I was there. I was there more than I've ever been. And aware that I wasn't as good as I probably would have thought I was if I had been drinking, or if I'd had a drink half an hour and a half before.
Right.
It's interesting. Thank you, Ronnie.
Do you think that you weren't do you think that was a real feeling or just an internal feeling?
Oh yeah, I think it was a real feeling. I was present. I was aware of myself on a stage acting in a play which I wasn't as aware of before. That was like one of three things that were sort of split in myself.
Okay,
you
but
know.
that doesn't tell us anything about what the audience perceived, right?
Oh yeah,
So,
no.
I mean, what's interesting to me is that we hear all kinds of stories about performers when they were drunk on stage and the bad things that they did and how terrible
Right.
they were. I can't think of a single story of that guy was, you put 6 beers in him and then he's great, but with no beers he's terrible.
Right.
I've never heard that
But
story.
we don't know about them.
Yeah.
We don't know. If somebody is a functioning and goes on stage and is that person and does well, we don't hear about them being a drinker
Right.
because they're doing their job. So I guess we wouldn't know.
But I mean, but for example, folks that
I didn't
stop drinking,
I never
right?
knew that you drank.
I know other people have told me that.
I never knew that
I
you
know.
drank. And think how many times I was on stage with you.
Right.
I didn't know that you came with drinks in you.
Me neither. I never thought for a minute in the times that in the productions we were involved with that you would have been anything. You would have been.
Well, I wasn't drunk. I mean, it had
Well,
been.
no, of course not. I
previously,
mean,
right.
yeah.
But let's get back to Joe's point if we can. I think he was trying to get at something that we didn't quite fully grab.
Well, I mean, so there are certainly actors that have been heavy drinkers in the past and then have gotten sober, right? I've never heard a story about an actor that went sober and then, oh, they used to be so good, but they're not good now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I've never heard that story.
Oh,
Yeah.
gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, I was totally talking about my own personal experience, not that of the audience. When I was saying I felt clear in a way that I didn't. Well, I knew where I was.
You know, Shannon, when you were talking about growing up in the household that I did, I never saw drinking around me. It wasn't something that, and I didn't drink as a young person either. In fact, I smoked marijuana before I had my first drinks, and that was, you know, late in college. So I think and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, because you never go through those experimenting times as a teenager.
Right.
When it's, but I also never saw alcohol as just the party. I always wanted it to be part of, I have a friend who teases me and says, oh, it's just because you're so refined. And I think that that's always kind of what I've wanted to be I've always wanted to be, you know, find the refined part of things. Yeah, anyway, I never wanted to drink Boone's Farm out behind the barn.
Really fun.
Okay, sadly, I have, as a former sorority girl, I've had
Yeah.
Boone's Farm.
Okay.
But there's there was almost like because of the way I you know, I'm so grateful for the way that I did grow up. I mean, I can only be grateful because that's all I know, right? Like, but and there's complication with that too, you know, there's whatever, but there was almost like because of that, it sort of extended to relationships that I had. So friends would always be like, oh, well, we're going to go imbibe in this, but you don't need to do that, Shannon. Like we're going to do it, but that's not you. So, and there was already sort of like a predetermined, like, we're going to protect you from this because, you know, there's a perception from you or that you've put out that it's bad, you know? So, and in times when, you know, that I have, it's still like, I mean, you know, I still feel, and I feel this sometimes too with even just with my kids, like taking my kids and dropping them off at school. I feel like somebody's going to show up at some point and be like, why is that kid dropping off those other kids? Like you know, like I'm going to get caught at the adult table. Like I still have this perception that at any point I'm going to get in trouble, you know, and yet I'm the oldest mom dropping off a kid, but I'm still like, somebody's going to figure it out. Like,
Who's letting me do this?
right. Like, why did they let me drive a car? Like, how did this happen? Like, they're going to figure it out. And so it's the same too. Like, you know, I remember turning 21 And it's a rite of passage, right? Like you go when you're 21 and you get a drink. And I, at the time, was working at Walt Disney World, and I was like, well, you're supposed to get carded on your 21st birthday. So I went to a Walgreens and I was like, I didn't know what to buy. Like I didn't drink. So I just like picked up a bottle of something and I went to the checkout and put it down. And I was so proud of myself. Like this is a rite of passage. You're supposed to do this. I didn't even know if I didn't even drink it after I got it. I gave it to someone. But I just waited at the counter for this person to card me so I could be like validated that I hit this milestone. And the guy didn't even card me. And I was like, don't you want to see my ID? And he was like, I guess. I'm like, oh, I'm supposed to do this, you know? But there's just this, I think about just I love the social aspect of after a show, you unwind and you can decompress and sort of process. And a couple of you have talked about or we've touched on this. I think about whenever I'm working on a show, I don't drink when I'm working on the show, because I get so insecure because, you know, and not that I haven't, there have been times, you know, you're unwinding, you have a drink. Let me look at my script. Let me look at the lines. Let me try them while I'm in this whatever mood state. And I'll feel so disingenuous. And I'll just get in my head and feel so critical, and it will mar that, whatever that, I'll think of it every single time I say that line, like, oh, you drank and you tried to say this line and you sounded so stupid. Like, why did you do it? And it's just mine. I do it to myself. And I'm like, you're not supposed to drink when you do this stuff. You know, it's like I watch Mad Men and they're drinking in the office and I'm like, oh my God, somebody's going to catch them.
Yeah,
like,
to be normal. Yeah. Shannon, I'm going to jump into something you said. I think it's a good thought. You know, I think that what brings people to theater often is the search for the opportunity to try on other parts of our personality within a character. And I think that the whole thing of alcohol, in a way, is stepping toward a different part of ourselves, or something that we can't find in our own controlled conscious self, for me anyway. So there is a kind of a connection there that I just wonder if anybody else resonates with.
Well, I mean, I don't, that doesn't resonate with me exactly, but it's, so I would say that alcohol doesn't ever make me more creative of a person. I've never experienced that. I would say that alcohol frees me to express things that I might not otherwise express, but it doesn't help the creation process at all for me.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's similar or different.
Well, for me, I would find words I wouldn't find otherwise, but I would have found them eventually anyway. It's not that it actually meant that. Amy, I feel something's coming from you. Do you what's on your mind?
My experience is just not like this at all.
Right.
I think what brought me to theater in the first place was wanting to explore my imagination, find a way to, you know, and I didn't come to it until I was 30, maybe 29, 30 years old. And it was simply because I had two small children in babies, like 2.5 and 18 months old when I did my first show, and I didn't have any lines, and I was just happy to be part of a group of people that was not these two babies and my husband, and I was outside of my home, and it wasn't my job, and it was fun, and these people were interesting, and they had different lives than I had, and so I came to that show really kind of naive and open-minded in a lot of ways, and I wanted to learn more, and that's where I fell into the Spotlight group, because I went to the open cattle call that they had every spring. You know, they cast the entire summer in one audition. It was everybody would show up, and clearly there was some favoritism for these people that were in this Spotlight workshop group. And I was like, well, how do I learn more about that? And, you had to audition for that group. I didn't know what I was doing. And then once I got in there, and at that time it wasn't a small group. I think there were 13 people in this group. We'd meet every Monday. It was very disciplined. We had scene work. We had a teacher who was very disciplined. And so I never fell into that part of theater that's social. I mean, that was really probably how I got involved, because I wanted that social aspect. So had I maybe not gotten into this group that was really honing in on learning, I mean, I have stacks of literature. I mean, I would love to take this information and broadly share it, because it was really valuable for me. And it taught me so much about theater, so much. But in a lot of that group study and conversations, and as that group evolved, and as we got into more, became very familiar with each other. We were very close friends. We would do a lot of things together, and they never really involved a lot of drinking. We'd have maybe.
Mm-hmm.
It was always short periods of time. We were never together. Like, we'd go out and have a drink, we'd have a meal. Like, we'd have a meal, glass of wine, everybody go home, right? We'd have, a Christmas party. It started at a certain time and it ended at a certain time. It wasn't something that
Sure.
went all night long. And so, I mean, it was, again, I don't know. It was a really great experience for me, and it probably kept me away from that indulgent side of my nature, because certainly alcohol was a part of my life for 8th grade on, right?
Yeah, it gave you what you wanted. I think that's what you're saying.
And honestly, it gave the learning part of it, the craft, the work, the development, the evolution of getting better at something and going was so far outweighed the benefits of doing anything else. Like, it was wonderful.
Right.
And there wasn't, alcohol was just expensive, and I had 2 kids, and it didn't make sense.
Time is running short, as it always does, way too soon. So I'm looking for people who have something they definitely want to say that haven't had a chance to say it yet on any of the things we've been talking about.
Well, I wanted to ask a question, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something that the theater community should be doing to help people who might be having alcohol issues in whatever way that means, right? I mean, is there anything that we should be doing that we are not doing as a community?
I don't think so. Ronnie, what do you think?
It's a really interesting question, because there's part of me that says on the side of safety, on this either physical safety, on the side of liability's sake, there ought to be enforceable policies about alcohol in theater, because certainly it can get to a point of not being safe. But it's a very, very hard line to toe, because it is such a personal choice, and there are folks who will hide it from you. There are folks who will justify it, and there are folks who are completely fine. And so it would be hard to capture all of those experiences in one single policy, right? Like, I'll be really candid. It took me a really long time of being comfortable at Riverwalk to ever feel like I could actually take my sip of Jameson. And it was always in private. It was always snuck in. And that's because of the culture that we are here as a community. We are here to come around this thing together. We are here to offer experiences for our audience and for the community, all of these types of things. And so I probably personally took advantage of that. I perhaps took advantage of that level of comfort, that level of probably at the time, at the peak of my theater career. That sounds really weird to say.
It's okay.
I appreciate the question, but I don't know what a solution could look like, other than it's a more personal relationship. I don't know that a theater or necessarily a policy could provide that type of support or awareness, right?
Yeah, Joe, I think we have policies for the things that happen as a consequence of people drinking. I mean, I think that's kind of what, like, for instance, I think sometimes alcohol can lead to someone doing some really awful things, older people with younger people, sexually or physically, because they are, loosening up their inhibitions and doing things that really aren't proper. And so I think that people do things while drinking that could, certainly we would have policies about, but I don't think it's narrowed in on alcohol, because I don't know, we tried it once as a country and it didn't work. And
yeah. I mean, so the genesis of my question was more, is there anything we can do to help rather than to punish? Because the punishment is not particularly interesting to me. Yeah. I already know where I'm going to draw the lines as a theater producer, and I think all of the different theater producers have different lines on that side of it, and I don't think that's an issue. But if there's anything we can do to help people not feel like they're alone,
I think doing plays that sort of let people have these kind of conversations, I think, is probably one thing.
Well, and to that point, Doak, I was just thinking about, as Veronica was answering Joe's question, and I was reflecting on when's the last time that I saw a new show that handled the topic of alcohol, like how often that may be at the heart of, or somehow tied in thematically to a show. And it's not as prevalent anymore. So we've gotten away from those topics as we've evolved, socially. We've moved on to other things that have sort of like maybe taken precedence. And that's not to say that one is more important than the other, but there almost becomes like a sort of, well, we already talked about that. And so when it makes an appearance, it's sort of like in a casual sense.
Yeah, it's hard to be new about it.
Yeah. Right. Like it's just something that's going on, or it's treated in like a comical sense where it's like, well, so-and-so's drunk in this scene, and it's not really like addressed anymore, because it's sort of, well, we're dealing with other complicated things. And I don't know how it continues to come up, I think it's important that people still tell the stories when they're comfortable, or where they can.
I think it's so interesting right now. And I'm so aware of it, with this lens, that there's this mommy needs a drink, like culture, like you come home and you have a drink, I need my wine. It's everywhere.
It is.
Mommy drinks.
Well, especially during the pandemic. I mean, how many and memes were there about?
And so I just think that folks feel like it's not that big of a deal, right? Like we drink wine in our sippy cups, and we drink wine in our what are those plastic ones? I can't remember the name of them, whatever. But like, it's just, you walk, everything is based around drinking. And so why wouldn't theater be a place where you're already gotten showmances, you're already having drama, you're already having, like, you're living with these folks in and out. Why wouldn't you introduce that part of your life with them? And where's the line? I mean, I think
it made me think when Amy was talking about how, Spotlight treated it as a job, almost as not a job. Well, yeah, kind of
revered
a vocation. It was, it had rules. And there is another part of the theater community that does it because that's their social life. And social life involves drinking. Now, and so I think that it is difficult to divorce those two things. If you're there because you're socializing, then why not drink? That's not, and maybe the main purpose isn't the work. The main purpose, and if you get a show out of it, great. But the main purpose is we're here to enjoy each other's company and, to have have a good time together.
Oh.
Yeah, that's, you're exactly right, Ginny. It's just and you can see it. You can see it in productions where, and I don't participate, and I imagine that doesn't reflect well on my personality. But I just, once someone brings in, all the food and beverage before a show, and I am just like, get that out of here. Is no place in this.
I'm that way too.
Right.
Yeah.
It's process.
I'm that way.
It interrupts the process.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I know that and I'm not comfortable in it. It makes me uncomfortable, physically uncomfortable, and I don't know. I think I can't change that. It's too ingrained in me now.
And for me as well, even though I wasn't ever part of that, I never was part of, I go and do my shows, but I don't think I became part of any of the groups. I definitely wasn't part of the younger group that Ronnie and Joe and Shannon were all part of, but I'm not a part of that older group that still goes and has breakfast and lunches and stuff.
Yeah, no, me neither.
I just did shows. So,
Well,
and
There are
I
these
do
really
have
interesting
friends.
pockets
what's that?
too. There's these really interesting pockets when Amy was talking about kind of that 30-something group that kind of grew up or came to a different part of age together with Spotlight. I remember that I came into Riverwalk as a 19-year-old, and I got married and divorced and had kids like through that and became legal drinking age. And so that was maybe just perhaps more of the social experience that shone through in that particular friend group. It's so fascinating to just listen to all of the different ways.
And I don't mean to say that that's a bad thing. I mean,
Mm-mm.
I don't.
No, I don't think it is.
No.
I don't think it's just different ways of looking at it. But I think that's why it's hard to. It's integral, and so it's hard to break the two apart.
Yeah.
And as
Oh.
Joe said, what can we do to help? Well, what are we helping?
Yeah. So before I send you off for the exit question, because our time is getting late, I'm going to practice a little shameless self-promotion. You want to play about alcoholism? I'm writing one.
That's right. That's right.
It's called Vodka.
That's right, Doak.
It's called Vodka, and I think I'll be done with it probably in a couple months. I'm really excited. I actually wrote, Dickson had their theme of dreams this year for their short play competition, and so I wrote a short play about my vodka dreams, which are dreams I have of drinking vodka now that I'm sober. And so I wrote a little play about that, and it was not bad, but it would never actually merit doing at Ixion. But I realized I had a full-length play if I pursued it farther, because these three characters show up in this opening dream, and then if I do three separate scenes with those characters, the woman he was in love with, who he lost, the best friend who's trying to help him, and his unexpected daughter. So you got like passion, friendship, and responsibility all there. That's things that touch alcohol. Cool. I think it's going to be great. And
Sounds Russian.
it sounds Russian. Well, just the vodka part. If I'd made it a gin toddy, it would have been something else. So the exit question I'd like you to think about as you go off camera for a couple minutes. Let's see if this works. I never write them down. If it doesn't, just say whatever you want to say. But in theater, for me, in my own personal process of exploring a character in a play, I look for verbs. I playing verbs as opposed to adjectives. So what my major objective is throughout the entire play, and what my objective is on each individual kind of line. There's a verb attached to it. So I thought, well, let's play with verbs. If you could come up with a verb, and then whatever words come after it, for what does theater do? No, that's not the question. What does alcohol do? And if you can make it there, in terms of theater, what does it do to our experience, our individual experience, our communal experience of theater? And there's a million answers to that question, but I just wondering what might rise up for you as you think about what does alcohol do to the community theater, okay? Just try that on. If it goes nowhere for you, like I said, say whatever you want to say. But I'll ask you
Like
back
an
on.
SAT question.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's tough.
So I'll see you in a couple minutes, okay? All right. And continuing self-promotion, I'm not talking about another theater in this spot, which I usually do. Instead, as I'm winding down this like season of these dialogues, as we get to the holidays, I want to do something more just sort of blatantly fun. And so I'm going to host a theater trivia tournament. I've been writing the questions now. I'm having a lot of fun with it. I'm looking to get at least 25 people to want to be part of it. If we have more apply than that, I have this whole plan for like a Jeopardy test, a test that you come on Zoom. We won't record that for people, but multiple answer questions about theater and we'll got a great scoring system. We'll see who rises up in that and becomes the top 25. And then I'll put you in groups of 5. So it's like each competition will have 5 people in it, and then the winners of those first 5 will go on to the next round, plus the highest scoring of the other groups to make 10 for 2 semifinal rounds, and then a final round of the top 5. And the prize will be a $250 donation to the theater of your choice in your name or someone else's name. So I mean, you could use it to like get a membership for somebody who's maybe not in the theater too. So that's what I'm going to do, and it's going to be fun. And I hope that I'm going to actually tomorrow put something out on Facebook and elsewhere announcing it, and probably do a little explanation here on my YouTube channel too for people to understand it better. But don't be shy. I mean, it'll be fun. Don't feel you have to know a lot of stuff. Just come on and have fun playing the game. Come on back, everybody. My beautiful friends. I love you so much for doing this. Who'd like to go first? Who came up with a verb or something else they'd like to say in closing tonight?
I'll start.
Ginny.
The verb that I came up with was puzzle.
Hmm.
I'm puzzled by the interaction of alcohol and community theater, because for me, I guess I'm just very, very self-involved and didn't see it around me. I kind of heard stories of some people who were drinkers on stage, but for me, it never really affected me and the job that I needed to do or what seemed to be happening around me on the stage. So I'm puzzled by the question that you couched as if it was an integral part. For me, it never has been.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not surprised, but it is interesting. Yeah, very much. Who would like to go next?
I can go.
Okay.
The word I thought of is that it submerges. And there are absolutely some negative ways to play with that word, but there are also some. When I think of the offstage social experiences that alcohol provided, certainly to me, and what I assume to the folks around me, is that it also submerged us into this this space together where we celebrated a little bit harder, we loved a little bit harder, we told one another things that we might not have told each other had we not been drinking. And that I don't want to romanticize or justify those experiences, but there are times. I mean, Joe, God dang, at your house, like some of the best times of my life, some of the best parties, and not because we're drinking, but because we're singing, we're dancing, we're being idiots, we're making wonderfully bad choices, without hurting one another physically. And alcohol is a part of that. And so it's hard for me to separate them. And we were submerged with one another in those spaces. And so there are some positive things that I remember off stage that alcohol played a role in. On stage, it's a submersion. It puts you underneath. It is difficult to come back from underneath once you've made that initial descent. And so it's just this big mixed bag of what the fuck, quite honestly. And I appreciate this conversation and being able to all speak our truths. And it certainly, it will be on my mind and in my heart as I do make that next, venture into theater, listening to all of these experiences. So thank you.
Thank you, Veronica.
Okay, I'll go. So I kind of kept fluctuating between 3 words, and they're essentially the same word. So, but I was thinking about insight. So what is it sort of insight within someone? And that can really like sort of be interchangeable, whether it's a positive or a negative. So again, it kind of goes back to that whole black and white. It's very much the way I see the world too, which I try to reconcile myself with every moment of every day, is like trying to see the gray, like not just being so black and white about something, but try to embrace that gray area. And I think about what insight can be, where it can flex between the positive and the negative. Can it incite something positive in someone, where it can be something that's a celebratory piece and a celebratory thing that can be used with some sort of moderation or sort of ability to step away from, like, what does it bring out in a positive sense, but then what does it also incite on another side? So, I think unfortunately that for any of us, given the fact that, I know that we've all spent many years, if not decades, in, dancing through theaters. And I think that we've all experienced different times witnessing people being incited in a negative way by alcohol. And that can be unfortunate too. And I only can hope that it then, provokes something positive, but I think of that word.
Thank you, Shannon.
I can go. I don't know if it's, did you want to go, Joe?
No, I'm dreading going. It's your turn.
I was kind of dreading going too.
Well, dread is a verb.
I don't know if it's a verb,
Okay.
because I'm not that smart. I think alcohol and theater can be a way to fill whatever space, and I want to say really a loneliness, right? Of an isolation and a loneliness that occurs, that you seek out some group that may inspire you, and along the way you find out you have a little fun, not only on stage, but maybe after the show closes and you come home and now you're full of all that adrenaline and you can't really sleep and you're lonely again. So that wasn't my circumstance, but I certainly have seen it, and I have experienced that feeling when a show closes, when the group leaves, when it's weeks before you get to do something else, or months or years. I took a hiatus for several years, and there's a certain void that if you don't fill it with what you love, and if you love vodka, you're going to fill it. You're going to find a way to fill it. And, this has been a really interesting conversation tonight, and certainly has given me a lot of, I want to think about some things a little more, but I don't think I just think that alcohol has a role probably in everybody's life to some extent at some point, and then you have to figure the rest out, because that's just what we have to do.
Thank you, Amy.
So I was really struggling to come up with a verb because to me, alcohol is so contradictory. So coming up with one word is difficult. The strongest verb that I could come up with is amplify. I think alcohol amplifies things, which can be good and can be horribly bad. You can amplify a signal so strong that the original signal is no longer there, right? Just like an audio. So that was the best verb that I could come up with.
It's nice. It's very nice. I think and you touched on this a little bit, but I'm into dualities now. I think everything and its opposite are true, right? That's my thing, my whole thing. But escape was the one that came up to me, and it just came up to me. I didn't have one planned ahead of time. Escape, which theater helps you escape from maybe, you know, things you want to escape from or things you need to escape from. Alcohol does as well. Gives you the comfort sometimes you need in order to stay alive, whatever. But through that escape, you also discover the opposite. You discover things. So this is kind of circular. I mean, my discovery of what being sober is like is part of the whole journey of my experience with alcohol. And I love it. I love how food tastes. I love how my Perrier with a little lime in it tastes. You know, it's just, both things have been important parts of my life that have helped bring me out, and out is where I want to be. You guys are great. Thank you so much.
You're great.
We like
Really?
you
Great.
too.
You're awesome.
Oh, that's great. That's
Real
wonderful.
pleasure.
All right, so I'm gonna stop the video and hang on just for a few minutes so we can say goodbye to each other off camera.